Great to meet you, sir. Thank you for taking a minute out for the show today.
Well, thanks for having me. This is going to be fun.
Absolutely. So, before we get into your good work, I want to know this. 6 years ago, this pandemic was changing our lives, everything about it. How did you get through that era, and how has it changed the way that you conduct business and live today?
Yeah, boy, it's been 6 years. It's hard to
Yeah.
it's hard to believe that, isn't it? Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'll give you the two kind of angles on it. On the personal side, for me, my I was moving. I had been living in Norway for 15 years. My wife's Norwegian, and our boys were in their teens. I had one who was about to be a senior in high school, one that was going to be a junior. And so we had made the commitment to move to the US. So we were in the middle of a kind of a international move to get everybody reconsolidated here in the US. So it was stressful from that standpoint. We sold our had our house there under contract, hadn't had a house here yet. Everything kind of ground to a halt. So, it was very tumultuous for us as a family because my wife and my older son stayed there for the better part of a year. My younger son came with me here, and we, transitioned, got him into high school here. Of course, that high school year was basically a homeschool year, as it turned out to be. So yeah, very strange on the personal side, and took us a while to kind of get reconsolidated. One of the onuses from moving back to the US was our business was growing and we were doing well. My business partner and I were looking at places. The business was, and this is, I've since divested from that business, but at the time, the thinking was we're going to need to be in DC. A lot of our clients were either in the defense or in the government space. So we spent a lot of time in the DC area. I didn't want to live in DC. So I was looking for places which had direct flights to DC. So I looked at like Charlotte, Pensacola, Charleston, Atlanta, places like that where I could get to DC when I needed to, but I could live somewhere more like where we wanted to live. So anyway, all that was going on. Then it turns out, I'm coming to answer your question here in a long sort of way around. Then it turns out you don't need to fly to DC, right? I mean, what the pandemic introduced to us was this idea that everybody got comfortable working virtually. And as we came, as the kind of return to office started to come back around, our clients really didn't expect us to come to their office or meet with them personally. And we'd been meeting with them over Zoom and Teams and Google Meet for months. And so really the need to travel was diminished more than considerably. And it basically just went away. I mean, in our business, in that business that I was in at the time, it was a consulting business. And it certainly helped from a business development standpoint to shake a hand and sit down with people and have a coffee. I mean, I would never um, downplay the importance of face to face when you can get it. But once relationships establishing or delivering the services, the need to necessarily be there on a weekly basis wasn't there at all. So that was probably my biggest lesson learned. I think we learned that lesson along with everybody else that technology, once everybody kind of gets comfortable with it and embraces it, technology has completely changed the way in which we deliver services. But it doesn't replace the business development side, the importance of physically meeting up.
I think that's what we learned. We were totally connected virtually, but I think we all embrace the idea that we're human beings and we need to be together. Doesn't mean that we have to travel exorbitantly. We can do Zoom, but I think there's this added importance. Are you feeling that in your line of work that being in front of someone's paramount?
Yeah, I would say actually in some kind of a strange way, it's really now kind of special to together with people, right? I mean, it's really when people know you take the time to hop on a flight, fly out to where they're at, possibly, rent a car, book a hotel, stay overnight, have a couple of meetings with them. I mean, whereas that was typically just the expectation that you would do that. Now it's viewed as almost kind of like a significant monumental effort on your part to do something that either your competitors aren't doing or isn't always expected. So, yeah, I think in a strange way, being willing to meet up personally and invest in that. I mean, there's an investment both in terms of your time and the physical expense of doing that, but it is a differentiator, really, in the sense that not everybody's willing to do it anymore. And if you are, you can really solidify relationships with clients in that way.
So let's get into your work, and you're kind of the James Bond guy. You're the execution guy. You take the strategy, you turn it into results. So let's get into the crux of what you do on a daily basis. And to do that, I'm going to put you in a school. You're in front of 12-year-olds. It's career day. Kid in the back of the room is like, "Hey, what do you do for a living?" How do you
Yeah,
answer?
good question. Well, first I tell them that's a great question, young man. I mean, to be trying to understand the difference between strategy and execution. A strategy, when people use the term strategy, this is basically how we're going to do something. The execution is kind of what we're specifically going to do, and then the decisions that you make and the actions that you take, right? I mean, you have a strategy to lose weight. Okay, I'm going to lose weight, so I'm going to exercise more. I'm going to eat more of a balanced diet. I'm going to work on my rest, right? That's your strategy. You're going to reduce your calories by 500 per day. You're going to jog 2 days a week. These are all things you say you're going to do, right? But the execution is, will you actually do it, right? Will you literally go to bed at 9 o'clock at night and not stay up too late so that you can wake up in the morning early? Will you hit snooze and sleep through the morning workout, or will you actually get up and do it? So the strategy is not impossible to come up with. There's lots of strategies, and there's lots of different successful strategies to accomplish any particular goal in business. The question is, will you execute on that strategy? And that's really kind of the piece that we try to bolster with our clients, is to focus on the decision making day in and day out, the leadership component, and the follow through, and making sure that people are really following, adhering to the strategy, and taking the actions that we said we were going to take, and following through on the work.
So, what did you want to be at 12 years old when you were in that room and that speaker came in? What were you dreaming about?
I wonder, my dad was a military was a career military officer, and I probably early on, knew that that was something that I would want to do, and I ultimately did that. I mean, I did serve in the Marine Corps as an officer, so that was, it wasn't the lead pipe thing. There are lots of things but probably at that age I thought I was going to be playing in the NFL or
Of
being in the
course.
NBA, some sort of sports related dream. So
Yeah.
we would, I was a big college basketball fan at that age, so North Carolina Tar Heels. I was in my driveway making that free throw to win the national championship. So 12 years old. I mean, Michael in 82, 83, Michael Jordan is winning
Yeah.
the national championship with the Carolina Tar Heels. I was a big fan. So yeah, probably that age, I thought I was going to be a basketball star.
It's still weird to think that he didn't really hit the tread until he was a junior.
Isn't
Like,
that?
yeah, he was the late bloomer, but yeah, that was the day. So let me ask you this. Beside the fact that your dad was in the military and you followed in those footsteps, what were some of the early foundational elements of your business acumen, of getting to a point where you're executing strategy, you're helping business leaders get to that place? What do you think happened early on in your life that allowed you to get to this point?
I thought a lot about that. I wish I had a good, kind of aha moment, but I think it was probably a culmination of several things, kind of confluence of several things. I mean, I had a very good, both me, I had a stable family relationship, right? It was myself and my younger brother. I had parents that, were together. They loved each other. We had a great, like, home, middle class kind of home situation. I think that sets a foundation for that. So I had good, um, role models at home. I had good role models at school. I had good role models in my coaches and church and places like that. So, I mean, in a lot of ways, I mean, I just so very much benefited from the it takes a village, kind of concept, where any one of those things, it's hard to say what that, how much each percentage, contributed to that. But I think it's the totality of that. I do think sports were pretty instrumental for me. And I played baseball and basketball and football, all the way up through high school. Ultimately, played a couple of years of college basketball very poorly and at a very low level. But, I just think sports and the goal setting and practice and commitment and teamwork and being able to take instruction, but be able to lead other people as well. I think all that was a natural fit for me as I went into the Marine Corps, and being an infantry officer in the Marine Corps was a continuation of a lot of that, right? I mean, you get assigned a mission, you've got to break down how we're going to accomplish it. You turn to your teammates, you develop a plan, you have to brief them on the plan, you take feedback on that plan, you ultimately make difficult decisions in a short amount of time with limited resources to accomplish something specific.
Yeah.
You get very direct feedback from your seniors, and you have to often give very direct feedback to your juniors. Um, so a lot of that to me was, looking back on it, and then, I came out of the Marine Corps and went directly into one of General Electric's. They had a program where they were hiring a lot of junior military officers at the time. And I don't have an MBA. Didn't have an MBA at the time. Didn't never went back and got one. So business for me was more kind of learned, at the coalface, kind of doing it yourself. So I worked for GE for a few years. I worked in defense as a defense contractor for a number of years overseas. I worked at businesses like IBM for a little while in their consulting practice. So I've had a very mixed, and then ultimately started our own business in 2011. I've been an entrepreneur since various businesses. We've started and sold a couple of businesses. And I recently started the mission-driven leadership, the leadership consulting business that I'm in now. This is about a year old now. So I've always been willing to try something new, knowing that failure is always out there. But I've been very, one of the things my dad, I probably learned it from my dad, but I've heard it other places as well, was that it's okay to you got to make a decision. You got to move forward, right? You can oftentimes fix a bad decision with a subsequent decision. And so you don't have to anguish over, there are obviously some very big, hefty decisions which are tough to come back from. But most decisions in life aren't that way, right? You can make a decision. You can start a business, and if it works out, great. If it doesn't, you can make a small correction and fix it, or you can get out of that thing and start something else and bring with you the lessons you learned. So, for me, playing on good teams, bad teams. I mean, all that stuff looking back on it, in life has really kind of set the stage for business. And business is competitive. Businesses, in a lot of ways, businesses like warfare. I mean, obviously the stakes aren't as high, but the enemy gets a choice, right? You have this great plan and you're going to do this, but then you have variables that come in like weather and equipment breaks down, and there's, people who don't do what you thought they were going to do, or they don't do what they're told, or as I said, the enemy gets a vote too, right? They get to do what they're going to do. It's like playing chess, right? I mean, you plan out the next couple of moves, but you don't know what move he's going to make, 9 moves from now. So you'll have to adjust. And business is very much like that, right? I try to keep it at that sort of level in my mind that there's a lot of variables here. You won't have it all figured out. You just, every day you get up and you do what you said you were going to do as best you can, and you try to make small corrections as you go.
I think about when I think about professional athletes and all these pressures, and everybody talks about the money, but just listening to you talk about sports, the one thing that's inherent that wraps all of those qualities up is discipline.
Mm,
You got to go to practice. You got to arrive. You got to be there. Like Michael Jordan, sometimes you play through the flu during
right.
important games. It's all that
Sure.
discipline, and then that lends to what you're doing in the business world. It's all a part of that excellence, that pushing forward, never giving up, having that
Yeah.
discipline to go forward. Um, so, who's been that hero? Who's been that inspirational force for you in your life that's allowed you to get to this professional point in your life?
I've had a few, my dad, obviously, kind of first and foremost, my own, my dad. My dad was not a business guy. He was a career military officer. And he was started off as a Marine helicopter pilot, got out, went to seminary, went back in the Navy as a chaplain, and served, the remaining portion of his career in the Navy as a chaplain. And so he was not a war hero in some sort of like, typical sort of sense, but what my dad is, and he's still alive, thankfully, is just very steady, amazing integrity, makes great connections with people, is somebody who is completely trustworthy and admired by anybody who's met him or known him. And so to me, that just goes a long, long way. Again, that's not a bit. I mean, he has no business acumen, so to speak. So I mean, I've been taken under the wing. I have my own podcast. I interviewed a guy named Rob McMahon, who was early on for me, very instrumental. But as I left the Marine Corps, he was one of the first people that took me under his wing at General Electric. Stayed in touch with him for many, many years. Um, Another recent guest on my podcast, Lieutenant General David Furness, who's now retired. Retired 3-star general. He also took me under his wing early on. I was a lieutenant. He was a captain, but he was about 10 years ahead of me. Had a lot more life experience at that stage, and so yeah, that's been important. I try to learn something from everybody. I mean, even they don't know I'm learning, right? I'm just observing and I'm thinking, that was really smart what he did or she did, or I really like the way she handled that situation. And if I can, I'll try to go out and say, man, that was really smart the way you did that. You really, if I can connect with them and give them those sort of kudos, I will try to. But most often you can't, it's just like, but I still walk away from it thinking, yeah, I could use that in the future myself.
So if you could have a dream guest on your podcast, an entrepreneur, a business mind, anybody on the planet, who'd you love to talk to?
Ooh, that's a good one. It's somebody who I would find very fascinating to talk to, and there's kind of a hometown connection is Mark Cuban, the
Yeah.
the former owner of the Dallas Mavericks. He went to my high school. I never knew him because he's probably 10 or 15 years older than me, but he's from my hometown, Mount Lebanon, Pennsylvania. And I just everything I've seen of him, I was interviews and the way in which he kind of explain. I think he's a very good storyteller, very good explainer of complex things. I think he was very successful in business. Obviously, I think he was a very successful franchise owner of the Mavericks. So yeah, that'd be somebody who I think is kind of to me is a good example of somebody who started off from pretty humble beginnings, right? I mean, just very middle class, upbringing, but showed a lot of perseverance, persistence. I'm sure he tried many things that weren't successful before he became successful, and I'm always fascinated by people who just kind of like dust himself off and keep going.
Yeah.
So yeah, probably Mark Cuban. So if Mark, if you see this, look me up.
That's the other thing. We're putting it out in the universe. So
Right.
when that alarm clock goes off in the morning, what is it about you that gets up, has that energy for the client and for you and your family? What is that collective energy for you every day?
I don't know. I trip, it's kind of like only the paranoid survive kind of a thing. I mean, I forget who that's attributed to. It seemed to me like it was attributed to a CEO from the 80s, one of these iconic CEOs, only the paranoid survive kind of thing. And I don't live paranoid, but I've set high expectations for myself and I don't mind being held to those expectations. But in putting that kind of pressure on yourself, I mean, it's a motivator for me, right? I mean, I don't live stressful moment to moment, but I've always felt, even as a young person, that, things would be expected of you, and that's okay. And things have been expected of me over the years. And I've delivered on that in a lot of ways. I've fallen short, in other ways at different periods. And that doesn't feel great. So, that to me is kind of the underlying constant burn is not that I aspire to be rich or famous or leave my mark on the world like like a Winston Churchill. I mean, those aren't the kind of aspirations that I have, but just to be like a steady deliverer of on people's expectations, is something that's always there for me.
So when you see that big stack of words that say retirement, what comes to mind? Because we get stuck in our careers, we're living our lives, doing our things. What's retirement mean to you?
I wonder. I start to think about it now. I mean, I just turned 54, so I mean, it's not that far away. But at the same time, people work now well into their, late 60s, early 70s. It's not unheard of for people to do that. So I haven't thought too much about it. The idea that you would be financially secure enough to really do whatever you want, really with all your time and some resources is appealing. And I think what I would do with that time is probably give back in some way, whether that be to work with younger entrepreneurs or people transitioning out of the military or young people in disadvantaged communities who maybe don't benefit from all that network or those wonderful things that I had with the stable home and the great teachers and parents and coaches, right? I mean, there's so many kids. I have two boys of my own, one's 24 and one's 22, and I very much try to model their life after the one that I, experienced, their upbringing. My wife and I did that, I think, to a large part, and they've launched, they're on their way, and so those are things that you have no control over as a human. You have no control over where you're born, whether your dad sticks around, whether the school district that you're going to cares about you. All those things are completely outside of, everybody's control. And so the idea that as a retiree, you could maybe plow back some of the time that I would have spent working to, helping some people achieve things that they wouldn't have otherwise gotten if, in the circumstance that they're in.
So let me ask you this. If you walked into a room of everybody that's known you in a business sense throughout your career, between the military and your professional life, and you swim through that group of people and go to a podium and tell them one fun story, maybe one of the best games that you ever played in, jumping out
Oh
of an
my.
airplane, first concert you went to, outrunning a bear, a fun story that would humanize you to that group, what would be a fun story you would tell that room?
Oh, geez, you really put me on the spot. I really, I can't think of a good answer to that. I don't think of myself. I didn't, I wish I'd outrun a bear. I actually, strangely, and I'd never had a great basketball game. I was a
Right.
absolute epitome of like the role player. I mean, I was the guy who would get a rebound and pass it to the guys that were better. I
Right.
mean, I was a bench player. I loved playing, but I was not, I was not an elite player by any means. And I'm not an elite entrepreneur for that matter. I mean, I'm, making my way. We're making it work, but it's, I mean, I'm not like, on the level that a lot of people. I mean, I try to think about this as like I think I'm other people probably look at my life and they think you have it great, because there's in some way, starting out or further behind in the race kind of a thing. But I mean, I'm not like on Hormozy's level or, Mark. I mean, some of these people have absolutely learned the stratosphere. And so, good for them. And I never really wanted that. I mean, if it happened to me, I wouldn't have been unhappy. So I don't know. I'm not sure. That's a good question. I should think about a better answer for that. But I'm not prepared to get in front of a group of young people and give them some impressive story, to be
Well,
honest.
no, that's good. Your story about the way you played and how you operated, that makes
Mm.
that's a great story. Let me ask you this. If you could, being a Tar Heels fan growing up, if you could get into a time machine and go in to the annals of Michael Jordan's history, what game would you want to see? What moment would you love to have seen with your own eyes?
Oh, yeah, I'd love to have seen Michael Jordan play, at Carmichael as a kid. I mean, if you think about that era with James Worthy
Uh-huh.
and, Jordan, I mean, there's just so many, and Carolina continued to produce, elite level stars all through the late 80s and early 90s. There's so many names to mention. So, I never saw him play live, and we didn't have those. My parents weren't interested in that. My wasn't like my dad was a big. In fact, my dad was probably he went to Wake Forest, so he was a Wake Forest fan. But then they would have been more inclined to root for the Wolfpack in North Carolina, so they were more like North Carolina State fans. So I don't know how I got to. Probably I was just a Tar Heel fan because they were winning a lot, and I like
Yeah.
Jordan. So yeah, I don't know. Would be great to see one of those iconic, Tar Heel Duke games,
Yeah.
either at Cameron Indoor, or at Carmichael in those days. Yeah, it would have been pretty raucous. They were pretty heated. Tobacco Road basketball was it was a big deal.
It was a real deal. So, aside from your family, when you look at your career and your path, what are you the proudest of?
I'm probably proudest. I've had a very diverse, I mean, I hate to even use the word career, right? I've had like a work history. I've been I've been willing to do a lot of different things that interested me, still pay the bills, still be a provider. But I mean, I have hopped from different thing to different thing. I mean, I did the Marine Corps, until they didn't want me anymore. And then I went to General Electric. Well, I had a couple of little jobs before I went to GE. I was in GE for 3 years at two different places. I learned a lot. I went to work in Iraq and Afghanistan as a security, a consultant or contractor. Did that for years. I worked for a Swiss company out of Geneva for a couple of years. I mean, these are things that just like I just would sometimes be asked to do something. And I thought, yeah, let's give that a try. Or I would apply for a job and they would interview me and offer it to me. And I'd think, yeah, I'll do this, So I think probably the the most thing I'm most proud of, just willing to try, right? Haven't always been successful. Things don't always work out, but always able to dust yourself off, kind of, I hate to say reinvent yourself, but just be willing to try something else. I think too many people get into this career and they think, well, I've only been in tech sales for 12 years. That's all I've ever done, or I'm an HR professional. I mean, that's what I am. But in their heart of hearts, they kind of want to be doing something else.
Yeah.
But they now feel like, well, I've got no experience doing that. Who would allow me to do that? Or I want to start my own business, or I have a good friend of mine who he was kind of pigeonholed as a CFO because that was his experience, right? As a, MBA from an elite school, worked as a CFO in the private equity community, and he kind of tired of that, but everybody else just viewed him as he was so successful at it, nobody would let him do anything. He wanted to run his own company. He wanted to be a CEO, but every time he'd interview for jobs, they'd tell him, but you're just I mean, not you're just a CFO, but you're just such a good CFO. We see you as a CFO type. We don't see you as a CEO type. And he basically did not take no for an answer. He literally like kept looking for the right opportunities. And finally, he's broken out of that kind of paradigm, which for him, I think he felt was not a dead end, but just confining in some way.
Yeah.
And so I really, yeah, I'm impressed by people that are willing to take risks, calculated risks, not reckless, but it's a risk. Life's about risk management.
Absolutely. So everyone has a perception of you, family, friends, clients, colleagues, but you run the show. What's your perception of you? Who do you think you are?
Hmm. Man, I wish you'd have sent me these questions in advance. I would have had.
You're
No,
doing great.
only because these are great questions, and I owe you better answers than I'm probably able to provide. I'd like to think again. I think of myself as steady. I think of myself as somebody that does execute, that can follow through on commitments. Somebody that's willing to take risks. I think of myself as decisive. These are some of the in our coaching and in our work, we believe there are kind of 6 dimensions to a concept we call bias for action. And so having a high bias for action is a good thing. I mean, people that are willing to take action, and there are different archetypes in that space. I mean, I won't get into a whole lot of detail on it here, but some people are very decisive, bordering on reckless. Some people are very much more cautious, circumspect. I wouldn't say risk averse, but they view risk, in a more thorough sort of a way. And both of those archetypes are fantastic, right? Neither are uh, pejorative or specifically good or bad, but they can be misaligned for a particular role at a particular time in a particular company. So, in a startup kind of a context, or when you're releasing new products, you want somebody who has a high level of iteration, right? They're willing to try stuff. They're willing to like make relatively snap decisions. Let's get the product out there. Let's see what the customer feedback is. We'll make changes as we go. When you're in a different type of business or in a different life cycle within a business, you want somebody who isn't so, I hate to say erratic, but somebody who is so willing to like just kind of bounce around. And there's a role for both of those archetypes and the other archetypes that do exist. There's a role for those, but you have to match that right person to that right role.
Yeah.
And so if I think about myself, where do I fit? I think I'm decisive. I think I'm a good follow through, but I'm not opposed to changing my mind and trying something different and moving in a different direction if I think that's the better way to go.
So if anybody wants to dive into Mission Driven, they want to tune into the podcast, any of the good business in your world, questions, where do they go?
Absolutely. Well, the podcast is Execution Exchange. You can find Execution Exchange on anywhere you find good podcasts. I mean, on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. We also broadcast on YouTube. You can find it on LinkedIn, Execution Exchange on LinkedIn. Mission-driven leadership. Our primary product is a product called Momentum Factor. It's momentum-factor.ai, and it's the product which we use to help businesses identify those correct archetypes for their leaders. So there's an online assessment that people take. It's a decision, what we call decision simulation. So it's a series of simulations. So you're put in the position of a particular role, and you need to make a series of decisions, and that ultimately measures your bias for action against those 6 dimensions that I alluded to earlier. So yeah, check us out on momentum-factor.ai or find me on LinkedIn.
Wonderful. I will put all this in the show notes. Jake, thank you, sir. Thank you for
Thank
the
you.
story.
Been a
Thank you for your
pleasure.
time. You're
All
wonderful.
right.
I
Talk
appreciate
to you
it.
later. Bye.
Thank you.